technological sophistication that we have not yet equaled.
Mm.
That, plus the fact that this structure is, without any doubt, a machine of some sort, whether or not one accepts my hypothesis, and I admit that it is a very speculative one, but whether or not one accepts my hypothesis, it is a machine of some sort. So the question then becomes, what is this technologically sophisticated civilization building a machine for, and so on and so forth. It's also positing the existence of an extremely sophisticated physics and technology to begin with.
Do you think that we need to go kind of off-planet to explain or find an intelligence behind such an ancient, sophisticated, architecture skill, basically?
I don't discount the possibility at all, and in fact, in the second book, the Giza Death Star Deployed, and in the third book, the Giza Death Star Destroyed, and in the book that's coming out, The Cosmic War, I very specifically connect Giza to some of the artifacts in the Cydonia region at Mars, and to other very extremely anomalous objects in the solar system.
Yeah.
I don't discount that possibility. In fact, I think if we take the text that I examine in the Cosmic War seriously, we have to go off-world. That being said, I don't necessarily think that we have to invoke the alien hypothesis or the extraterrestrial biological entity hypothesis to explain the presence of those structures and anomalies on those other planets. It may be the case, as some of the ancient texts indicate, that there is a human connection to some of these things, and that our own origins may be somewhat different than we suspect. But that being said, you can't rule out some sort of alien or extraterrestrial dealings or presence in this scenario either. And the simple reason is if we take some of these ancient texts seriously, particularly the ones from Mesopotamia, the Bible, some of the Babylonian epics like the Lugal-A or so on and so forth, there are clear allusions in all of those texts to the existence of some other intelligent life form that is not necessarily human, with which humans have been interacting. So you can't rule out that possibility either. It's a very open-ended scenario, really, that I'm developing in these 4 books.
Yeah, that seems like a good approach in that sense, because there is always difficulties in boiling down, and be certain about these things, especially considering that there have been such an incredible amount of time, between what we know and what the ancients basically knew, and again, oceans of time between there.
Exactly.
One thing that I do want to kind of squeeze in here is just as a thought here, considering that we could look at a flower and for example, detect mathematical beauty, a golden ratio type aspect can be found within flowers and within plants and all of this.
Right.
But the question is, is there a conscious intelligence there in the flower? But if we could, the possibility is, could we apply this kind of to the human level? Let's say that in more ancient times, humanity actually was more connected with nature, as it were, and because of the structures that we actually built, we were more in touch with nature, that this actually are reflecting kind of that, the universal mathematical beauty, as it were, and the conscious part of it actually is somewhat taken out, and this more reflects nature than it reflects ourselves. What do you think about that?
I think that probably that is the case, and in fact, in the first book, the Giza Death Star, I examined some ancient Hermetic texts of Egypt from a physics standpoint, and one of the things that pops out of that analysis is precisely the type of thinking that you're describing. I think that there's every indication that if this ancient civilization had this technological and scientific sophistication, I think that one implication of that is that they had a physics and for want of a better expression, a biological science that was at a very high level, unified and formally explicit. And, once we've said that, we've said a mouthful, because it opens up areas of connections to recent explorations in the physics of consciousness, in Russian work in biophysics, and so on and so forth.
Sure.
So I think that you're correct to point this out, that there is some sort of connection that's there. I don't think that our science as yet is sophisticated enough to know what the connection is, but I do think it's sophisticated enough to show that it's there.
Interesting, yeah. We have, in the past, in regards to the Great Pyramid, Hawass and the guys down there have been, pondering upon what is known as the Gantenbrink's door. They sent up a robot up the shaft. When was this? Back 2-3 years ago, I guess, the first time. It might even be more. Your take on it? They're going to send up another robot, I guess, in a few months, if I'm not mistaken. I don't know exactly the date there, but what do you think about the first, scenario that happened, and what do you think, will happen when they send up a second robot?
Well, you're asking a question there that's really more in the domain that Christopher Dunn has written about, but I know I've spoken with him at a number of conferences together with him, and familiar with his take on that, and I'm kind of try and answer his question more or less from the way that he has interpreted those explorations. His take is that Gantenbrink's door, when it was discovered, had, of course, those two little copper metal shafts that were sticking out of it.
Sure.
And if you read his book very carefully, he speculates that the Great Pyramid, as part of a machine, would have utilized some form of hydrogen inside of the internal chambers of the pyramid for the production of power. And in order to do that, of course, there had to have been knowledge of electricity. And his take on the Gantenbrink's door is precisely that what you see there are the two ends of an electrical circuit. And I think he's precisely correct. And he also, I should point out, when the Gantenbrink's expedition was announced, Dunn went on record as saying that they would find nothing behind the door. And that what they would find is just another empty shaft, and possibly a vertical shaft further up running down into the plateau of Giza itself. And he based that on some very specific engineering considerations that he elaborates in his book and in his lectures. Now, I think probably that what they are going to find, if they do this next exploration, is something very similar to what Dunn has described. And I don't suspect that Zahi Hawass and the Egyptian Department of Antiquities is going to be terribly forthcoming about it when they do. I don't think that they're going to know exactly what it represents or why it's there. We'll get the usual Egyptological nonsense about, Egyptian religion and pharaohs and afterlife and so on and so forth, and they're going to try and concoct some convoluted explanation for it, because they simply don't want it to be a machine, because if it's a machine, the Egyptians didn't build it.
Yeah, that's the problem right there. Exactly.
That's the problem right there.
And there's there's a huge number of researchers down there, and a lot of books has been written, a lot of history has been written about this, and again, if we are to all of a sudden, change that, a lot of, people will get out of work, so to speak, and a lot of books has to be rewritten, and that's, I guess, too much of a bother these days. So.
Well, it's true, and it's unfortunate, but
it is,
the other problem is of course Egyptian national pride, and rightly so.
Sure.
This is a source of pride for them, and it's a source of a lot of income for them.
Yeah, and
so
go ahead.
To a certain extent, one can appreciate Zahi Hawass's position. He's more or less got to maintain that position where he is posted in the Egyptian government. So
Sure.
I don't disparage the man for that at all.
No.
But like you say, if all of these alternative hypotheses are true, or even if only a few of them are true, it requires a massive rewriting of human history.
Indeed. And the political correctness now is ruining the scientific process in regards to, I've heard that people who state that the pyramids weren't built by Egyptians, that they are being accused of being racists or whatever. I mean, it's standing in the way of actually finding out what really has happened down there. At least that's my own view on it. But
well, I happen to agree with you, and it's to a certain extent even worse in the United States and Canada, because our universities here are so up to their earlobes with all of this political correctness nonsense that one can hardly view the university in this country as a forum for the open exchange of ideas anymore. It's anything but. We have too many vested interests, and there's too much government and corporate foundation grant money at stake to maintain with any academic credibility any alternative hypothesis. It's just not going to happen.
No.
So I think the other thing that it bodes is that the real research, for good or worse, is going to be done precisely in the alternative community.
Indeed, totally agree. I have to ask you in regards to your books, your names, of course. Has the Giza Death Star been deployed and destroyed?
Yes. In my opinion, the answer to both questions is yes. The scenario that I outline in the Giza Death Star deployed is basically one of a very ancient interplanetary war, and that, of course, is the scenario I elaborate a little bit further on in the Giza Death Star destroyed, and then, of course, I explore the scenario itself at some great length in the new book that's coming out. But one question I always get on talk shows when I'm talking about the Giza Death Star, and very often it's a question that people calling in will ask, and that is all right, has this weapon truly been destroyed? In other words, could someone, so to speak, turn a switch or plug it in?
Exactly, yeah, of course, yeah.
And the short answer is no, because there are things missing from the structure. We can see that for a fact by going into the Grand Gallery and noticing those 27 notches on each side of the gallery as it goes up into the antechamber and then into the King's Chamber. In all likelihood, those notches contained some sort of components that made the machine work. And again, I'd point your listeners to Christopher Dunn's book or to the first book in the Giza Death Star trilogy for an explanation of what those components were.
Sure.
The short answer is no. The other missing component is the obvious one, and that's the capstone.
Ah, of course.
So there's what we see there at Giza is the shell of a machine, and the shell of the machine itself, if one considers all of the implications of it, are rather horrifying, in my opinion. I do believe that some weapon was used millennia ago, if not millions of years ago, to explode the planet that used to exist in the asteroid belt of our solar system.
Ah, interesting.
This is where the story begins to get very interesting, and where it begins to connect with ancient mythology, Babylonian mythology, and Norse mythology, and Celtic mythology, and so on.
Indeed.
Because very clearly these texts speak of some colossally catastrophic event of that sort. But the take in the alternative community has always been to interpret it along naturalist or catastrophist lines. Simply an object careening into the solar system that collided with the planet and it blew up.
Sure.
I don't follow that theory because, in my opinion, such an object would still leave orbital eccentricities on the signatures of the orbits of the other planets that I don't believe are there. So the only other alternative, physics alternative that we have, and incidentally it's an alternative that the American physicist and astronomer who's kind of revived this